They are here of their own free will, so we owe them the respect and courtesy that they deserve. So, first couple things. If you have a cell phone, please silence it. Silence it, not silence it. Please silence it. That's one. If you take pictures with your cell phone or a tablet or something like that, please turn off the flash. That is distracting both to the candidates, the panelists, and sometimes affects our cameras. So please turn off your flash. And I think there'll be a lot of photos taken. I know the paper got taking photos. So we got TV, for goodness sake. So tonight, you have to be quiet. Because our goal is to get to as many questions as possible. And when we have interruptions, that takes time away from the candidates, and we show them with disrespectful and discourteous. There'll be two opportunities in which you can applaud. So, when we start the program, I will speak to the viewers at home. You'll hear the same rules. I'll talk about the rules, how the meeting is going to go on, and then I will say something to the effect of, I've instructed our live audience to remain silent. This takes time away from our candidates, with two exceptions. One at the conclusion of the debate, and the other is right now when we welcome them. At that point, you're allowed to talk. But throughout the debate, it doesn't make a difference whether it's a candidate you favor or one you disfavor. Please refrain from laughing or saying stuff under your breath. We're not showing you the courtesy of reserve. I know it's not easy sometimes to do the kind of shit. And then at the conclusion of the debate, so we finish, they're going to have their closing statements. Again, I have to speak to the viewers at home and say these things. At the end, I will say, I'm Mark, I'm in good night. Then you can applaud them. So don't applaud prematurely and finish their closing statements, because that takes time away from what we need to do. We're on a very tight schedule, we've got everything kind of planned. And that's about it. Just a reminder for anyone who's near our cameras, you have to get up and leave for whatever reason. I don't know if they're going to let you back in here after you. I don't know the rules on that. But just be aware, there are live cameras here. Gentlemen, that bald spot you thought no one knows about, we will see on TV as you walk around. So just warning you ahead of time. We've got three panels who ask some questions throughout the evening. I'm going to be the traffic cop and make sure to stay on time. That's pretty much it. Again, thanks very much. By the way, if you want to, feel free to move forward. I'm sad to say you probably won't get TV. But if you want to move forward, get close to the action, I think it's in your best interest. And I think if you're here in support of a specific candidate, I think they would appreciate that as well. You will give them the support they deserve. These folks listen. You guys like my kids. You're like my kids at home, you don't listen. Okay. Thank you very much for being here.
You get a green light. But hold on. Once we go live stream, they pick up everything too.
In here, it goes up to the house.
Okay.
My sister.
We're going to test these at some point. We're going to test these at some point.
Talk. You'll hear me say.
Okay.
See it? That's you. It's your mom.
Okay.
Did Ashley give you the questions for?
Huh?
Did Ashley give you the questions for?
Oh my gosh. That's not.
I knew better than that. I knew after today there's only one person that
once again, I'll refer to you both as Dr. Olsen, Dr. Rowe. I will be directing our panelists who will be asking the questions. I would ask both of you, even though it's courtesy to acknowledge us, please don't. Dr. Olsen, your camera is there. This audience doesn't care that you don't look at them. You want to look at your viewers at home. That's who you want to appeal to. Dr. Rowe, same thing. Don't worry about acknowledging the panelists who made the audience. That's your camera. That's who you want to look to with all your answers. And in the booth, would you be kind enough to put the timer on so they can see what that looks like? So in those two monitors back, yeah, put the timer on so they can see it. So when
Me? Yeah, testing 1, 2, 3.
when the question
Many
is
people believe
asked,
Congress. Hello, hello, hello.
those monitors are going to go green. That means your time is
Testing,
started.
1, 2, 3.
Where's the monitor? I'm sorry.
I can't even see them.
Testing.
Two large monitors.
Oh, the big one, okay, I see them. Yeah, yeah, sure.
Good, everybody?
There they are, yeah.
We're good, Chuck?
All right, hold on a second. If you could run through the colors, please. So that's green. That means your time is started. When it goes to yellow, you have 20 seconds left. When it turns orange, you have 10 seconds left. When it turns red, that's orange. When it turns red,
We know orange here, Mark.
time's expired. Stop. I will also say your time's expired. I would ask you to please honor that and stop your
My
comments
hair is
now.
ready to explode.
Each of you have 60. Each of you have 6 rebuttals, 30 seconds each. I would encourage you to use your rebuttals, not leave them on the table. That's your time. But your rebuttals have to be used or they will be expired before we go to closing statements. You can use rebuttals to either extend your remarks or to rebut an opponent. But once you go to closing remarks, you cannot use your rebuttal at that time. So whatever you don't use, you've lost. 5 minutes away. Those are the general comments. We've talked already before. I was like a referee in the changing rooms before the boxing match. Doctor, any questions?
I do. I think I was told I'd have a bottle of water, and here it is. All right, good.
And we're going to invoice you for that, by the way. Doctor, anything I can answer
I
for
have
you?
no idea
sir.
what you're talking about.
Okay, we're excited. Great crowd here. Gentlemen, best of luck to both of you.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you. Thank you much. One more question.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Does the mic have to stand in here, or am I allowed to get excited and pick it up and prance?
The guys in the booth will probably have a heart attack.
Okay, we can't have that
But
because
I would say, actually, with all due respect,
that would distract us from
if
our.
you
If we had to go
start
do
moving a
CPR.
whole lot, you start falling out of your camera shot.
All right.
It's the people at home watching you who you really want to
Okay.
appeal to. These folks know you and love you. We want to appeal to the viewers at home. So
Especially this bunch right here. They love me a lot. So.
I can hear you, Britt. Travis, would you tell Britt I can hear her? Oh, one quick thing. If for some reason those monitors go out, we're going to have someone who's in the center seat here. They're going to have, sorry, we don't have an orange folder. So it'll be green that your time starts, yellow, 30 seconds to go, red, stop. So only if those monitors for some reason stop, that's our back. We'll have someone seated right there. 3 minutes.
That's more like it.
It's 2 to 3.
Well, just count back. Check this out. At least you got Krieger to get some good shots of your cards.
That's great,
That'll be
yeah.
good. He'll be good at that. So.
Just need to archive that stuff.
Hey, Chuck, when I introduce the panelists, is that a 3-shot for you? That should be a 3-shot. Okay. Stand by. Here we go. 2 minutes. Minute and a half. Minute and a half. I'll count a minute after that. 3 seconds. Minute away. Seconds. I'll count you in from 10. 20 seconds. 15. 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2. Good evening. I'm Mark Hyman. Welcome to this debate for the 1st Congressional District of Tennessee between Marty Olsen and Phil Rowe. Earlier, I confirmed with the candidates how they would prefer to be addressed. Now for our audience. If your only experience in watching a political debate was during the 2016 election cycle, then you're in for a surprise. There will be no trick or gotcha questions, no showboating by the moderator. This is an opportunity for these 2 candidates to showcase their political and philosophical differences. If you want the silliness from 2016, I urge you to watch one of the cable news channels. The order in which the candidates are standing and the order in which they deliver their closing remarks was decided earlier by the drawing of cards. The candidates agreed to tonight's debate format. Our distinguished panel asking questions will be Laura Spell of the Bristol Herald-Courier, Paul Johnson of WCYB News 5, and Beth Reinhardt of the Bristol Chamber of Commerce. There will be no opening statements. Each candidate has 60 seconds to respond to a question. They each have 6 30-second rebuttals, which they may use at their discretion, either to rebut an opponent's remarks or to extend their own remarks. However, all rebuttals must be used prior to closing statements. As moderator, I reserve the right to ask a follow-up question if, in my judgment, it's needed in order to clarify an answer. We have a live studio audience comprised of supporters of both candidates and some undecided voters. I've asked the audience to refrain from any reaction during the debate, as this only takes time away from the candidates. However, there are 2 exceptions: at the conclusion of the debate and right now when we welcome the candidates. Gentlemen, we have a lot to cover, not much time. Good luck to both of you. Let's get started. The first question of the evening will come from Laura Spell. We'll start with you, Dr. Olsen.
Many people believe Congress is plagued by division, partisanship, and gridlock. Some argue this is what the constitutional framers envisioned, a slow, deliberative process. Others argue they want a Congress that quickly enacts laws. Where do you stand?
I would agree completely that we have too much division in Congress right now. I'm quite concerned about people scoring points against each other as opposed to working together to find solutions. So much of our life we can think about what do we agree on, and we can take steps to think about what we agree on and take steps in that direction as opposed to just arguing, making points against the other side. In my own case, I was actually an independent for most of my adult life because I really felt that both sides were busy arguing with each other, and it was when I decided to run for office, I looked in my heart and said, the Democrats' role is to take care of everyday Americans. I felt comfortable with that role. But for myself, I'd like to point out that I've taken the No Pelosi pledge. I will not vote for Nancy Pelosi for Speaker, and I think that's a part of what I'm saying about if I'm the one who goes to Congress, it's going to be voting for you, the East Tennesseans. I don't really care about partisan arguments.
Dr. Rowe, same question.
I think one of the things that you see in the news today is about how partisan things are, but the truth is actually something different than that. I chair the Committee on Veterans Affairs in the U.S. House. We've passed over 70 bills, bipartisan bills, and 29 of them yesterday, the President just signed the 29th bill into law. For the first time in 20 years, we've gotten almost 90% of our appropriations bills done on time and under the budget caps. I know that myself, I have passed a piece of legislation with Steny Hoyer, who is the #2 Democrat, which allowed children or schools to have EpiPens, and right in Kingsport, Tennessee, a young girl's life was saved because of that piece of legislation. And this Congress, for instance, has been the most bipartisan in the last 20 years, although you wouldn't know it by watching television. So there's a lot that goes on there that you don't realize because it's not reported. We had a great hearing the other day during the Kavanaugh hearings on the Senate. No one ever heard a word of it on the veteran suicide prevention, a very bipartisan bill. So I think there's more than you think that goes on in Washington today.
The next question will come from Paul Johnson. Dr. Rowe, we'll start with you.
Tennessee's 1st Congressional District has no shortage of bright, hard-working young people. But all too often they leave the area, the district, for college, and they don't return. What can be done to retain the young talent and to provide more opportunities that entire young adults to return to the region?
No, it's not just here that's happening too. In our country, when we recovered from the last recession, there are 3,100 counties in this country. 20 of them, 20, made up half the new business formation in America. So it's not just here. And I think what we have, PJ, is we need an issue with workforce development. I can tell you one rural county that I represent, we put in high-speed broadband. That allowed a call center to go in this very rural county and create 120 jobs. So where we are in rural America, the new superhighway is broadband, and we need to get that to every nook and cranny in our district. And then, by the way, just our story, this is a great place to live where we are. We have great universities. We have great diversity here. We have a wonderful environment here. So I would encourage people to look at our area, and that's what I would recommend we do.
Dr. Olsen, same question.
I think that this is an example of missed opportunities. Yes, we have wonderful young people here. Yes, we have wonderful people in East Tennessee. When I walk into businesses in our communities, Main Street, many towns in our areas, what do you need? Well, I need to know the business next door. People are struggling because the downtown areas have so many open stores, empty storefronts. And we have federal grants that we should be getting to develop these businesses. Well, in the last available 2016-2017 report, federal grants, 12 counties in this district, $0 in federal grants to develop our region. And I really think this is something that we could do better. I think that the Congressional office should be approaching people saying, we've got these grants, what we can do to help you get these grants. To develop our businesses in the area is something we've got to do. We've got wonderful communities here. We have wonderful environmental opportunities to grow businesses, to bring people to spend their tourist dollars in our areas. We should be doing better than we're doing.
For question 3, we'll start with Beth Reinhardt, and we'll start with you, Dr. Olsen.
The opioid epidemic impacts nearly every Tennessee community. What can be done to reverse this rising and deadly drug abuse issue?
Well, it's a great question because it is a terrible problem. It's not just for the patients that have this. It's not just a problem for the families of these patients. And I have members of my family, I'm guessing most people listening have a member of their family that has been affected. But this is a problem for our economy. Businesses are afraid to move to our region because they're afraid of, quote, health care of the workforce. That means, can they get enough workers to work in their business because they might all fail their drug screens. And it's a problem for our school systems because just a few weeks ago, it was shown that Tennessee school children are starting to struggle in the first and second grades if they had problems with drug addiction when their mothers were pregnant. So I have worked with pregnant women that are addicted to narcotics. I have helped them get their doses down to 0. I've done my part as one little thing I can do. I would like to point out that my opponent has taken over $100,000 from the pharmaceutical industry. He's taken money from Suboxone clinics, and I think this is an area that we're clearly different.
Your time's expired.
Well, first of all, it's a huge problem in Tennessee. In 1998, we delivered 50 opioid-addicted babies in this state. In 2015, over 1,000 in this state. So it is a huge problem. And in the last year's statistics were available in Tennessee in 2017, over 1,700 deaths. And that doesn't just include all of the other untoward events that occur because of this. What we've done in Congress, we've realized this, in the 21st Century Cures Bill, we put $2 billion toward opioid treatment and research. The omnibus bill we passed in March, another $4 billion, and another $4 billion in the budget we just voted on a couple of weeks ago. So the resources are there. We need to use education. We need education of our doctors, of our providers. We also have to educate our patients and the population in general about what to do about the danger of these drugs and the absolute victimization of our population with this opioid epidemic. It affects all phases. Your time has expired.
I'd like to rebut, please.
Rebuttal?
I just believe we're really not doing enough. Certainly this bill is a great start. The bill gives grants to those who have programs. And if you're at a place like East Tennessee, you don't have a whole lot of resources sometimes to even apply for grants. So sometimes a grant approach is just not enough of an approach. We have folks that need help and they need it now. And I'm concerned that we're just getting started. We're working too slowly. When we have people that are showing up in first grade struggling in school because of an opioid epidemic, we have to stop digging the hole that we're in. We have to stop it now. And I really believe we're not taking advantage of all our opportunities.
Question 4 will come from Laura Spell. We'll start with you, Dr. Rowe.
At more than $1 trillion, student loan debt is now bigger than vehicle loan and credit card debt. It is second only to mortgage debt. In Tennessee, 60% of graduates have student loan debt averaging just over $27,000. What role does Congress have, if any, in addressing this problem?
Would you repeat that a little louder? It's hard to hear you over here.
Sure. At more than $1 trillion, student loan debt is now bigger than vehicle loan and credit card debt. It is second only to mortgage debt. In Tennessee, 60% of graduates have student loan debt averaging just over $27,000. What role does Congress have, if any, in addressing this problem?
Well, to me, one of the things that's, I think, one of the most tragic things, I went to college and medical school in 7 years. My dad was a factory worker. My mother was a bank teller. I stayed at home for college. I was able to graduate with no debt. It's hard to believe, but I graduated from college and medical school with no debt whatsoever. Today, the average medical student's a couple of $100,000 in debt. And it's one of the things that we have, I think it's a great tragedy in our country. In Tennessee, and I've got to give us a shout out, we're the only state in the union that provides free community college or technical school. That's a great start, plus the Hope Scholarship. So it's possible to graduate from college in our great state without an onerous debt. Medical school, I know here locally the tuition is exorbitantly high, and certainly I think we need to help hold those rates down. One of the things that's occurred is our federal rules and regulations. Dr. Nick Zeppos, the Chancellor of Vanderbilt, said complying with government rules and regulations adds $10,000 to each student's tuition. So getting the government out of some of it would help.
Time's expired. Dr. Olsen, same question.
This is a very serious problem for our entire country, not just our region. And when you look at a young person who's got tens of thousands of dollars in debt, that is a young person who's putting off buying a house. So that not only affects that person's family, it affects our entire economy because money being spent for interest payments from student loans are not being spent to stimulate our economy. One of the things that we can do is to make sure that this investment that our country is making, and it is an investment, and our country has invested in education for 200 years, we can be proud of it, but we're investing in for-profit institutions that are just taking students' money and have a graduation rate under 50%. We need to stop wasting our money there, and that allows us to invest in more productive systems. But for the students that have debt now, for the people that are graduating, I think we're going to have to look at our bankruptcy laws. And yes, bankruptcy is a very difficult thing, but for that person that there's no hope for their future, I think we need to offer bankruptcy to a person who has not had the opportunity and never has the chance to pay off that horrible debt.
Question 5 will come from Paul Johnson. We'll start with you, Dr. Olsen.
Since the beginning of the year, there has been a tit-for-tat in the placing of tariffs on imported goods in the U.S. and among some of its major trading partners. What is your position on this?
I think the tariffs are probably the biggest difference I have in terms of the economic policy of our country. I think that I will agree with President Trump on going after the Chinese theft of our intellectual property. I mean, that's something we have to address. But the expansion of the tariffs has been extremely harmful to our community and our region. We have poultry farmers, hog farmers, grain farmers, and we have automobile manufacturers who are making parts for cars around the world. These folks are all harmed. And for our region, we don't have any steel mills. We don't have any aluminum mines. So the tariffs haven't protected us. The tariffs have only been a cost. Now, certainly there's plans to give some money to farmers because, sorry, we hurt you with our tariffs, let's give you some money. But the average East Tennessean wants to earn his work, earn her work, earn the dollars that he or she makes, and they don't really want a handout from the government. They want an economy that helps them produce and contribute.
Dr. Rowe, same question.
Well, I'm a fair trade guy, free trade guy. The problem is the trade had been fair. And what the president said, look, we're all for free trade, but let's have fair trade. And what we just saw was a renegotiated NAFTA, which has been good for Mexico, good for the United States, and good for Canada. Let me give you an example. The Canadians had a 300% tariff on our dairy products. Wisconsin's a big dairy producing state. When they couldn't send their products north, guess what they did? They sent them south. And guess what happened? About 6 months ago, 11 dairy farmers in our area got a letter that said in 90 days, we don't need any of your products. Well, we scrambled, did everything we could to find a source for their milk because they would be out of business in 90 days. The tariffs now, the agreement we've got, we now can sell our dairy products north. The Canadians can bring products here to this country. And by the way, for the Mexicans, 40% of the motor products, parts for cars, have to be at a wage of $16 an hour. If you don't want to produce it in Mexico, you produce it in the U.S.
May I rebut, please?
For the next question,
May I rebut, Mark, could I rebut?
A rebuttal?
Yes, please. So Congress does have the authority to interact on tariffs unless they're national security. And Congressman Rowe did make statements against tariffs on newsprint. And newsprint, of course, is an opportunity to say nice things about politicians. I really think that we should be working on cutting tariffs for the farmers in the area, especially because we have soybean farmers, again, corn raisers, and the automobile manufacturing. So I really think that we're not doing what we could be doing to protect our own citizens in East Tennessee from these retaliatory tariffs.
And Dr. Olsen, you have 4 rebuttals remaining.
Thank you.
Dr. Rowe, you have 6. Question 6 will come from Beth Reinhardt. We'll start with you, Dr. Rowe.
According to the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence, 40% of Tennessee women and 1/3 of Tennessee men experience intimate partner physical violence, intimate partner rape, and/or intimate partner stalking in their lifetimes. Does Congress have a responsibility in addressing this epidemic?
Now, that's a great question, and obviously it is. It relates to a lot of different things. I think those issues are related to mental health issues, to substance abuse issues, to broken families. We have a county in my district where half the children don't live with a biologic parent. And it's hard to believe that almost half the children don't. So there's a story there in every single family about this. And certainly I think education, I think the schools are doing a good job about not bullying, not threatening people. I mean, that's not the way I was raised. I was raised to be respectful to everyone by my mom and dad and counseled very strongly in that respect by my father. And I think certainly that could be done. I think the schools are a great part, and I think they're doing a wonderful job in this. And yes, it is a problem in our state.
Dr. Olsen, same question.
Yes, certainly domestic violence is a significant problem, and Dr. Rowe and I are both providers of care to women, and we've seen it in our practices. We have people that suffer from this terrible, terrible problem. One of the things I think we can do better, though, is setting a good example. So in Congress today, if a person is sued by somebody for a sexual inappropriate behavior, that money comes out of the taxpayer's dollar to settle that. And I think that's just a bad example. I think we can do better than we're doing to protect all people from sexual violence, domestic violence, and other violence.
I need a signal from the booth because we've lost the monitor. Okay, your time has expired. Question 7 will come from Laura Spell, and we'll start with you, Dr. Olsen. And I apologize for that. We may have lost our monitors. Can I have my secondary timer sit in the middle, please? Secondary timer, please sit in the middle. So question 7 will come from Laura Spell. We'll start with you, Dr. Olsen.
Small business owners, especially here in East Tennessee, are the job creators of a community. Why should small business owners vote for you?
Well, small business owners certainly are the job creators of the community. And as I mentioned, I believe that there are federal grants out there that we have not worked hard enough to get for our communities. Small businesses also have significant concerns about health care because that's an expense that they have, taking care of the health care of their employees. And plans for health care that are out there, if we get rid of the Affordable Care Act, as Congressman planned to do, that throws another 60,000 people off the health care rolls, well then small businesses, you may not recognize this, but half of the health care in our region is paid for by the government. It's half of it, Medicare and Medicaid. Well, most of these people are not sitting at home. Most of these people are out there getting jobs. They're working hard. They just have a job that doesn't have health care. And so if we harm these healthcare access to these patients and these humans, and that means they can't work because they're sick. So healthcare is extremely important to small businesses, as is making sure that we have the resources to promote them that we need.
And your time's expired. Dr. Rowe, same question. And gentlemen, it looks like we may have our timers in the back, so we'll try to go with those.
We just did something a little less than a year ago for small business, which was the most important thing that you could possibly do. And there are two things we did. One was the Tax Cut and Jobs Act. There's no question that was huge. Number two was a cut in regulations. President Trump took office. He said, I want to cut 2 regulations for every one we put in. We cut 22 for every one we put in. We lowered taxes for every individual in this country. We also lowered taxes for every business in this country. Let me tell you what has happened. We have more people working now than any time in the history of this country. We have the lowest unemployment rate in 49 years, and I've gone into business after business, and the problem is now they can't find enough workers. There are not enough people to fill those jobs. And the first time in my life I've ever seen the GDP higher than the unemployment rate. So the big problem now, I think we have is workforce development, developing a workforce that can fill those jobs. We cut taxes for small business. They're keeping that money and investing. It's not government grants. It's capital they do, and they use their own money to produce jobs.
Could I rebut, Mark?
Rebuttal, please.
So the national figures are different than the East Tennessee figures. Our unemployment rate is another 40% higher than the national figures. Our average income is $41,000. Our median income is $41,000 a year compared to $57,000 a year. So this economic boom has not reached East Tennessee, and that's a reason why I think we can do better. We can't just pretend that that it's all rosy out there when we have people out there trying to decide if they're going to pay their rent this week or they're going to pay their electric bill.
For question 8, we'll start with, we'll come from Paul Johnson. We'll start with you, Dr. Rowe.
In the bottom economic third of Tennessee's population, children are generally raised by single mothers with a high school degree or less. What steps can be taken to break this cycle of limited education, poverty, and single-parent households?
You know, PJ, that is a very tough question. One of the things that we've noticed in this country in the last 30 or 40 years is a breakdown of our families. We now have, as you pointed out, I think almost half the children born in the country, Medicaid is their primary insurance source. So I think keeping families together, Our faith-based organizations can certainly help and do that and encourage people to stay together as families and set role models. I think young families need role models. And look, an education, the key absolutely is an education. You have to have a good education. It is emancipating. It is freeing. Once you've got those good education and skills, you can take care of yourself and your family. And by the way, there's an old study done years ago. If you're married, you're 20, when you have your first child and have a high school education, you almost do not live in poverty. So marriage is something that also helps prevent poverty.
Dr. Olsen, same question.
It's certainly a significant problem, and as we've discussed, it's over half of the children in America are not raised by their two biologic parents. And there's only so much, there are limits to government power. There's only so much a government can do with that statistic. So what can the government do? Well, the government can promote education so that single parents of either gender have the educational opportunities that they need to raise their family as well. And then we get back to healthcare access once again, because if you don't have access to contraception, then people are more likely to have children they didn't plan on. And so with good healthcare access, there would hopefully be less children out there being raised by single mothers and less poverty among the children. You know, in one of our counties in this district, 1 out of 3 children under 5 is in poverty. And this is another area that I just think we can do better.
I'd like to rebut.
Rebuttal.
One of the things that, you know, because you have an insurance card, when the ACA passed, I absolutely agreed that what we needed was to lower cost and increased access. Remember the president said, oh, we're going to lower everybody's premium by $2,500 and you can keep your doctor? In Tennessee, rates went up 174%. And the majority of the uncollectible debt in our hospital system right here where we live are people with insurance. The out-of-pockets and copays are so high, they can't afford to make the payments. That's the problem. We have to create policies that lower the cost. Your time has expired.
Question 9 will come from Beth Reinhardt. We'll start with you, Dr. Olsen.
The nation recently marked the 17th anniversary of U.S. troops in Afghanistan. What is your position regarding the presence of U.S. troops and when they should come home?
I've had the opportunity to travel to Iraq 15 times to do maternal safety courses there. I have seen the important work that our soldiers have done. And all veterans in the room, I'd like to thank you for your service. That includes you, Congressman Rowe. It's important work. In northern Iraq, there are folks that are alive today because Americans put their lives on the line. We have to recognize, though, that there are limits to American power. There are limits to our ability to ask our own citizens to put their lives on the line, and so we need to work with partners. We need to work with partners that are developing democracies so that we can stabilize environments and then take our folks home. My concern about our current foreign policy is that we seem to be working a little more with dictators than I'd like, and we appear to be not promoting democracy. Democracies don't go to war against each other. It's extremely rare that two democracies will go to war against each other. That's why we should promote it as a country.
Dr. Rowe, same question.
Well, it's a difficult piece of real estate. I'm a U.S. Army veteran, served in Korea 1973, 1974, and I've been to Afghanistan 3 times. I actually went there to see where injuries occurred on the battlefield, how they were taken care of, how they were transferred back to the States, and how those veterans were cared for. It was like the first trip I made in 2009 was like going back to the Middle Ages. It is a very medieval country. We've made some progress there, but I don't know if it will be successful unless we stay for decades more, because it is a tribalistic society. I look at Korea, what happened to it. We've made an incredible gains in Korea. But in Afghanistan, I am still puzzled at whether it will be successful or not. We have improved things. There's no question about that. And the question is it worth the treasure of this country? I think certainly the question's out on that.
Question 10 will come from Laura Spell, and we'll start with you, Dr. Rowe.
Nearly half of the states have either approved marijuana for medical use or have decriminalized it for personal recreational use. A few states have completely legalized it. Do you support the federal government's legalization of marijuana for medical use, and do you support legalization for recreational use?
Well, you know, marijuana is a drug, and I've said this from the time I've been in the U.S. Congress. Look, we should study this chemical compound and its many components like with any other drug. We should study it. There should be black box warnings. There should be contraindications, indications. So what I did, I'd finally heard enough about medical marijuana. I proposed, along with Tim Walz, who's running for governor in Minnesota now, but he serves on the Veterans Affairs Committee with me. We placed a bill in this year that will require the VA to study medical marijuana. It's a great place to do it. The VA can do a great job. And then as a scientist, we both are scientists, we'll find out, does it work for certain conditions? Is it good for PTSD? It needs to be studied for pediatric seizures. But we need medical science to study this, give us the contraindications, the indications, the dosages, and yes, I support the study of it, and then we'll let the scientific facts speak for themselves.
Dr. Olsen, same question, please.
We have a system right now where states are deciding state by state, and I really think that's a great idea to have states work on this, and then we learn from each other as we make different decisions. I've been very surprised as I talk to constituents in our area how important this issue is to so many people. And yes, we have marijuana growing in our first district. It's a source of revenue. It's a source of stimulation to our economy. The use of marijuana is felt by some to decrease the potential for opioid addiction if people have a choice. That's something I agree with the Congressman we need to study. I would point out that it's my understanding that if a veteran is in a state where marijuana is legal and that veteran goes to a VA facility, the veteran is denied access to the marijuana prescribed drug by that veteran's physician while that veteran is hospitalized. So I think that's an area of improvement.
Question 11 will come from Paul Johnson. We'll start with you, Dr. Olsen.
Every single day, Tennessee businesses must balance their books, and Tennesseans must not overspend their family finances. Yet, in the last 50 years, the federal government has had only 5 balanced budgets, and none since the first year of George Bush's presidency. D.C. has had budget deficits when Republicans ran Washington and when Democrats were in charge, and with divided government. There is more than enough blame to go around. How can this be corrected?
Well, this is, I would think, one of the #1 problems our country faces, because each person out there watching, you owe $65,000. That's your share of the deficit. So add that on your student loans, your mortgage, your car payment. Somehow that money is going to come due someday. It's going to happen, and so we need to address it. And I would agree that it's been a problem for all administrations. I know that a couple of years ago, Congressman Rowe was very staunchly against the deficit, and yet recently he voted for a budget that the deficit continued to increase. What can we do about it is, of course, the question. And the question is, we need to look at certain government redundancies. For example, there are 11 different government agencies within the health department of the government that look at HIV spread in our cities. Well, I don't think we need 11 agencies to do that. I think we probably get done in 1 or 2 or 3. So the first thing we need to do is to start looking at our government and being more efficient.
Dr. Rowe, same question, please.
There's no question in the last 8 years, the budget deficit doubled, almost doubled, almost to $20 trillion. And you got to know what the drivers of debt are. 1965, 75% of the debt, of the budget, in this country, we appropriated each year. We debated it. Today, only 30%. 70% of the federal budget is on autopilot. It's current law. Today, 11,000 people turned 65 years of age, and we said, you're going to get Medicare. That's a promise made. We have to keep that promise. That many people turned Social Security age. So if you look at the mandatory part of our spending, it's Medicare, Social Security, Medicaid, interest on the national debt, food stamps. Those are mandatory programs. All other 12 appropriations only make up 30% of the debt. So we have to look at the drivers of debt, and we have to do it in a bipartisan way, which we've never been able to do, a bipartisan way to be able to do this. And I think one of the ways we do it is grow our economy. Look, we took
Your time has expired. Dr. Olsen, same question, please. Oh, I'm sorry. Question 12. Question 12 will come from Beth Reinhardt. We'll start with you, Dr. Rowe.
Virtually every college in America receives federal grant money and or has students attending using federally backed student loans. Having said that, does Congress have a responsibility to address the growing concerns over free speech rights on college campuses and universities?
You know, a couple of things I want to Beth to talk about. One is that we need better financial counseling for students. When they come in, they don't have to borrow all the money they're able to borrow. So what we've done is pass bills in a bipartisan way that says, look, sit down with a financial advisor there at college, your student aid counselor, and talk to them and see what your actual needs are. And do that each year, not just when you fill out the FAFSA form, which is 110 questions long that almost nobody can figure out, and then when you almost are out of college. So that's absolutely one of the things we need to do and are going to start doing it better, is do a better job of financial stewardship for the students when they come in. And did you, about the question was free speech zones? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have a bill out to a sense of Congress. Now, look, I'm a student of the 60s. When the civil rights movement was going on and when we debated the Vietnam War, absolutely, college campus should be the epicenter of free speech. It should not be restricted on college campuses.
Your time's expired. Dr. Olsen, same question, please.
I would agree with Congressman Rowe that free speech is incredibly important in the development of young people. There is no reason to have a different rule for free speech on a college campus than you'd have in any other community in America. I don't need 60 seconds for that.
Question 13 will come from Laura Spell. We'll start with you, Dr. Olsen.
According to an April 2018 report from the Association of American Medical Colleges, the U.S. will experience a shortage of up to 120,000 doctors by the year 2030. That is a little more than a decade from now. East Tennessee could be among those areas hardest hit by shortages. What steps should federal authorities take to alleviate this problem?
That is a great question, because the other thing that you haven't added to is the fact that we have so many medical students that can't get a residency slot. So we've got all these people in training, then they graduate from medical school, and then they can't get a residency slot. And so instead of serving the community, they can't even pay their debts anymore. They're out there running around trying to get a public health master's or something and getting in further debt. And your question is, what can we do? Well, there's money out there that the federal government gives to residency programs, to hospitals to train residents. And sometimes hospitals use that money to train residents. Sometimes they use it for other services. Sometimes they use it to go build a new building and put somebody's name on it. So what we need to do is to take a look at which hospitals are actually using those funds to educate patients, to educate the residents, and those hospitals that are diverting in other directions, I guess they didn't need it. And so then we can give those funds to hospitals that are actually training people.
Dr. Rowe, same question, please.
One of the great problems today is American medical education. What I did when I had the opportunity, again, I'm on the Veterans Affairs Committee and was not chairman at the time, but we had the crisis of access in Phoenix. And when we did that with the Choice Act, what a colleague of mine did from California, a Democratic colleague, and I realized that it was extremely important to educate young physicians. So we created 1,500 residency slots in primary care and psychiatry and internal medicine at VA hospitals across the country. We know there are huge shortages there. And so we said, if you train there, and I did some of my medical training at a VA, that people were likely to stay there or at least in the community. So we're doing that right now. We're rolling out these extra residency slots, and certainly we're willing to even do that more, because it's absolutely right. There is a huge shortage of physicians and providers that are coming our way, and we're going to be the worst for it in this country.
Gentlemen, this is a courtesy reminder. Dr. Olsen, you have 3 rebuttals left. Dr. Rowe, you have 5. Question 14 will come from Paul Johnson. We'll start with you, Dr. Rowe.
Is enough being done for our veterans in Tennessee in regard to medical, mental health, and job support?
You know, one of the primary things we do, PJ, one of the great tragedies I see are 20 veteran suicides per day. I held a round table a week and a half ago, and a hearing in Washington on veteran suicide. There's $8 billion in PTSD treatment and mental health treatment in this budget that the VA has this year, and yet we have not moved the needle one bit in veteran suicide. It deeply troubles me. And we right now are going to take a very deep dive in the next Congress on how we can get best practices and find out what actually works and what actually helps lower these suicide rates. We know when these young people get out, if they don't have a job, we know that's extremely important to get meaningful work. But there are also a lot of suicides in older veterans my age, and also, disturbingly, there's an increase in women's suicide. And so we are looking at that in great detail and trying to find out what those best practices are to lower those horrific numbers.
Dr. Olsen, same question, please.
Well, certainly veterans deserve all that they receive in terms of the promises made to them for putting their lives on the line. And our own VA, I think we can be proud of Mountain Home VA in our area. I believe it's one of the better VAs, and the veterans that attend there tell me that, although not all are happy, but most of them believe it's one of the better VAs. I'm concerned about the move I see for privatization. I believe that Congressman Roe Party has moved forward towards privatization. I would hold up the electronic health record as an example. $16 billion spent on electronic health record. The VA's electronic health record was once the finest in the country. Replacement cost for that would be probably $4 to $6 billion if you had a comparison to Kaiser in California, and yet we're managing to spend $16 billion on this transition. It was a non-bid contract.
Your time has expired. Question 15 will come from Beth Reinhardt. We'll start with you. You'd like to rebuttal?
I would like to rebut that. Look, when you mention privatization of the VA, we're doing a lousy job if we're privatizing it, because when I got to Congress in 2009, we spent $97 billion on all VA services. That's health care, disability benefits, and cemeteries. This budget this year was $208 billion. And we haven't increased very much the number of veterans. So it's not a problem with resources. It's how we use those resources in caring for our veterans. So that's absolute nonsense that we're trying to privatize the VA.
Yeah, can I rebut that, please?
Rebuttal, please.
So again, when I talk to veterans in our community, what they tell me is, I used to be able to go see an endocrinologist at the VA. Now I can't go see an endocrinologist in the VA. I have to go to see a private endocrinologist. And that is then different medical record system, different transportation. Doctors don't talk together as much. So the veterans that I talk to, when they're talking about their health care, they believe that there's an effort towards privatization occurring.
Question 15 will come from Beth Reinhardt. We'll start with you, Dr. Olsen.
There is a growing concern about mental illness. It is often cited as a contributing factor in tragic events such as mass shootings. Yet law enforcement officials claim federal privacy laws make it difficult to identify those people with mental illness who pose the greatest risk. Is this merely the balance that must be struck between privacy and public safety, or can more be done?
Certainly, we want to make sure that folks that require mental health treatment have access to it. And sometimes there are regulations, and sometimes there are fear of regulations, so that people use regulations as an excuse. So I certainly believe that if a person believes that this citizen is at risk of hurting other people, and a law enforcement is afraid to report that, then that's probably overstepping the regulatory desire to maintain a patient's privacy. So no, I don't think we have to allow our citizens to be at risk just because of some bureaucratic regulations. I think people are probably over-interpreting. If they're not over-interpreting, then we need to change the regulations. We need to keep our communities safe.
Dr. Rowe, same question, please.
That's not going to take long to answer. We need common sense rules and regulations. Look, the HIPAA laws are there to protect your privacy, that sometimes they are taken, and Dr. Olsen knows this very well, that sometimes you can't even communicate if you think someone is suicidal. I mean, it's ridiculous. Of course we ought to be able to do that to try to save someone's life. And I talk to folks, I used to work in ER some, and we didn't have the stringent HIPAA laws that we have now. But I absolutely agree that there needs to be just some common sense. And we did that in the 21st Century Cures, where you could actually, if someone you felt was an extremist might commit suicide, that family member needs to know that so they can intervene and help out.
Question 16 will come from Laura Spell. We'll start with you, Dr. Rowe.
There is a housing crisis in East Tennessee. New construction of affordable entry-level homes is not keeping pace with population growth, making purchase for first-time homeowners unaffordable. What can be done at the federal level?
Now, I served on the City Commission and Planning Commission in Johnson City, for years. And one of the biggest problems we had was affordable housing, low-income housing. One of the great organizations in this area that I've become an incredible fan of is Appalachian Service Project. I have to give them a shout-out. When the great floods occurred down on Dry Creek, which shows you that God does have a sense of humor, when the 1,500-year flood took out 50 homes, we weren't big enough for a FEMA grant. But they stepped in there with the county. Mayor Dan Eldridge did a wonderful job with church organizations, with ASP, with volunteers, and literally built almost 40 homes that were given free to those folks. Up in West Virginia, Rennell, West Virginia, they've done the same thing. They're going into one of my counties, I won't mention which, and make sure that there are no substandard housing in that entire county. They're doing that. So there are agencies out there. It is a huge challenge, affordable housing, and it's more affordable here, believe it or not, than in Washington, D.C., where I live part of the time.
Dr. Olsen, same question, please.
Well, this is certainly a significant problem, and as I've traveled around to the 12 counties in our district, people have come up and talked to me about the fact that, I can't buy a house, I can't even rent a house. I'm living with my parents not because I want to, because there's no house for me to rent. And I think we get back to our economy with this, because when our average median salary is $41,000 a year and the average in the United States is $57,000 a year, there's just less money to spend on housing. So we need to make our economy more robust, and we can do that by taking a look at what we're strong in. We are strong in environment, we are strong in conservation. So around here, we don't have to make a decision. Is it good for the environment? Is it good for our economy? It's good for both. I mean, we have a national park on our border. We have an Appalachian Trail coming through our region. We have whitewater rafting. We need to promote that. We need to have some folks coming to visit us at even higher numbers to stimulate our economy so that we have better jobs for our citizens.
Rebuttal, please.
One of the things that's going to make us better are the programs that we passed to make it stronger. I just got out of Hamlin County last week, $130 million invested in manufacturing, 300 new manufacturing jobs. There are going to be 650 new manufacturing jobs down there when a Belgian bus company comes there. An educated workforce, low taxes, capital investment, and you'll have those jobs, and that's exactly what the Trump administration has done. They have brought those things here to this area.
Your time has expired. Question 17 will come from Paul Johnson. We'll start with you, Dr. Olsen.
There is a problem that affects communities around the nation, and it happens right here in East Tennessee. It often becomes a very political problem because of the border and immigration issues. Nonetheless, 1 in 4 sex trafficking victims in the U.S. is Hispanic. 40% are underage. The majority are girls. With respect to the sex trafficking victims who come from abroad, what more can the federal government do to stop sex trafficking into the U.S.?
Sex trafficking is a significant problem that we must address, and we also have to recognize the fact that we have problems with trafficking of our own citizens, that it's not just people being brought in. So the federal government certainly needs to vigorously prosecute folks that are guilty of these crimes. They're crossing state borders, and vigorous prosecution will, of course, be incredibly important to detain those who are involved in this. We need to, I'm certainly a believer in secure borders, and securing our borders would then make it more difficult to bring folks into our country and then abuse them.
Dr. Rowe, same question, please.
Thank you. What the House and Senate did in a bipartisan way was to go after these internet sites that promote this. I didn't even know what Backpage.com was. That's off the internet now. We've reduced, first of all, I think reducing sexual trafficking is one of the most important things we can do to see a life destroyed. One of the things you have to do, PJ, in this country is we have to secure our borders. And I went down to the border about 2 months ago and spent time down there actually seeing what the problems were. Sexual trafficking coming across the border, drugs. I just talked to a judge yesterday that said, look, it's now back to methamphetamine. The opioids are going down. I talked to an agent down there that had grabbed 192 pounds of fentanyl when micrograms can kill you. It was enough to kill millions of people. So we have to control our border, and that very much can help us control the sexual trafficking that's coming into this country.
Question 18 will come from Beth Reinhardt. We'll start with you, Dr. Rowe.
If you could propose just one amendment to the U.S. Constitution, what would it be and why?
I think probably one of the things that I would do to the U.S. Constitution would be a balanced budget amendment. 49 states have a balanced budget amendment. They balance their budget here in Tennessee. Families have a balanced budget amendment or they go bankrupt. The federal government does not. So I would strongly encourage us, and I voted for 2 of them. 2 times I voted for that. We have never gotten enough votes to get it out of the House. But I think requiring the federal government to be honest in budgeting is extremely important, not for us and not for my opponent, but for future generations, for the kids that I go to schools, high schools, elementary schools all the time, and it's their future that we're mortgaging. We're going to lower their standard of living because of the national debt we're leaving them. So I think a balanced budget amendment will be by far the most important thing we can do as a nation.
Dr. Olsen, same question, please.
The Constitution has kept our country great for over 200 years. Making amendments should only be done with significant consideration. And I personally, I'm not excited about a balanced budget amendment because I'm concerned that Congress should be doing its job. We can't, in an amendment, make sure we take care of every possible variable that might occur in the future. What happens if we're at war? What happens if we have another depression? So it worries me to have a balanced budget amendment. I would just personally prefer that Congress would do its job, give us budgets that are balanced, and we should elect folks that are going to help us do that. There is no amendment I think is standing out there that says, boy, we need to make this change right now.
Question 19 will come from Laura Spell. We'll start with you, Dr. Olsen.
In a typical year, Congress passes about 300 laws. In contrast, federal agencies enact about 3,000 regulations. Many have the effect of a law. Some argue Congress has been shirking its responsibilities by allowing unelected bureaucrats to do their jobs. Is this valid criticism?
I think it absolutely is a valid criticism. There are certainly regulations that I think Congress should say, sorry, we're going to pass a law that supersedes that regulation. And the one that comes closest to my heart would help us pay our medical bills. So in our country, we pay 3 times as much for our prescription medications as they do in the United Kingdom. And that just, to me, it's ridiculous. There's no reason for us to pay 3 times as much. Their outlier drugs are 9, 10 times as much. And so the FDA has said, well, it doesn't matter that a drug is made in the same plant and shipped to London, England, or Bristol, Tennessee, and that drug is safe. If it's made in the same plant, shipped to both places, why should we pay 3 times as much for it? I think Congress could say, if the drug is safe, you can buy your drug from the United Kingdom, you can save yourself 2/3 of that expense.
Dr. Rowe, same question, please.
You know, what we just talked about, for every rule and regulation that's been implemented by the Trump administration, we've gotten rid of 22. We passed a bill called the REINS Act. It's never gotten through the Senate that says that any bill, any rule or regulation that adds more than $100 million to the U.S. economy, costs that much, has to come back to the House for passage. I'll tell you a rule and regulation that got passed that I worked on for 7 years and 11 months. It's the Independent Payment Advisory Board. It was the worst idea in the Affordable Care Act. Basically, a lot of people call it a death panel. It was really a rationing panel. And in a bipartisan way with a Democratic doctor from California, I worked on it for 7 years and 11 months. That bad ideas in the trash bin of bad ideas. But if someone like me hadn't been tenacious and stayed with it, it wouldn't have happened. I totally agree that prescription drug costs are way too high. People cannot afford those, and we do need more generics. For every generic, if you get 4 or 5 generics, the price drops 80%.
Your time has expired. Gentlemen, we're tight on time, so for the last question, you will have 30 seconds to answer. The last question of the evening will come from Paul Johnson, and we'll start with you, Dr. Rowe.
Should transgender people serve in the military?
I think they're serving in the military now, Paul, and as far as I can tell, they've been serving honorably and without issues or problems. Until they show me an issue or problem, my answer would be yes.
Dr. Olsen, same question, please.
Yes.
Okay, in the TV business, that's caused you're making me light now with time. But thank you, gentlemen, for giving me all this extra time. Earlier the campaigns, so all of our rebuttals are now expired. We're going to head in towards closing statements. Earlier the campaigns drew cards to determine the order of closing statements. Gentlemen, you each have 2 minutes. Dr. Rowe, you go first.
First of all, thank everyone. I'd like to thank the Bristol Herald-Courier, WCYB, and the Chamber here, and Mark, you also, and all of you in the audience who came today. Look, this has been an incredible honor in my life to serve as a congressman from the 1st Congressional District. And I think one of the most historic districts in America. I would never thought growing up on a small farm in Middle Tennessee that I'd ever get to go to medical school and certainly ever serve in the U.S. Congress. I think one of the things that needs to be asked, I'm a legislator And what have I done in my 10 years in the U.S. House? Well, what I've done is taken this opportunity as chairman of the Veterans Affairs Committee and passed 70 pieces of legislation to help our nation's heroes, 29 of which have been signed into law. Some of them are major pieces of legislation. One we didn't talk about was the Forever GI Bill. You can use your GI Bill benefit now the rest of your life. If you shed blood for this country, you earn a Purple Heart, you get the Forever GI Bill. That was not the case before this piece of legislation. The VA Mission Act, which is how our veterans get their care in and outside the VA, extremely important piece of legislation about how they get health care. And realizing that 35% of all the health care the VA provides is outside. I think when President Trump took over, our military was in trouble. We had the smallest army since before World War II, the smallest Navy since before the World War I. And by the way, we could only launch half of our airplanes. We've made a huge investment in our military, and this was the most disturbing to me. Last year, we lost 4 times as many people in training accidents as we did in combat. We've upfunded the military. We've got our economy going like crazy. We're working on the border security, and health care. Health care is a huge issue for me. I want to thank you for your support. I appreciate your prayers. God bless each and every one of you, and God bless this great country.
Dr. Olsen?
I'd like to add my thanks to everybody that participated in making this event so successful. I've enjoyed the interaction. I'm just a guy from Johnson City. I have been here for 26 years. I've got a job that I love. I get to take care of patients every day. I get to help them with their lives. But as I looked towards the future, I was concerned that our country was headed in the wrong direction. And I'm pleased that I've had a chance to step forward, be a candidate, and now this year you have a choice. For the first time in a long time, you actually have a choice this year. And I think it's a pretty important choice. As you look around our country and you think about things, think about what's in your heart, think about what's in your gut. Are we headed the direction that you're the happiest with? And as you think about this, look into your heart and ask yourself, are you proud of all the changes that have occurred in the last 2 years? Do you think Congress has done a great job over the last 2 years? Do you feel that our region is taking all the steps towards prosperity that it needs to take? And if that's what you think, then your choice is simple. You're going to vote for more of the same. You're going to vote for Congressman Rowe. But if you think we can do better, if you think we're missing opportunities to expand the prosperity of our region, if you think love your neighbor as yourself is more than just words, it's a call to action, if you think that we can move forward for a brighter future, then I ask for your vote. I've really enjoyed the last year. I've met so many of you. I wish I could meet every East Tennessean. I thank the thousands of you who've shaken my hand, invited me into your homes, into your businesses, into your communities. This is a great place. We have great people. I appreciate the chance to serve us all in Congress. Thank you very much.
This concludes our debate. We'd like to thank both Dr. Olsen and Dr. Rowe for your participation. Good luck to both of you in your campaigns. For those of you watching at home, we've had 2 candidates who've demonstrated the differences and sometimes agreements in their policies and political philosophies. But it means nothing if you don't vote. So we strongly urge you to go to the polls, bring along a friend, bring along a family member, and vote. Thank you to Ballad Health and Bristol Regional Medical Center for hosting us. A big thanks to my colleagues, Laura Spell, Paul Johnson, and Beth Reinhardt for serving as our distinguished panelists. And thank you at home for joining us. Make sure you watch News 5 for reaction to this debate and all the day's breaking news. Please join us at Facebook at facebook.com/News5WCYB and tell us who you think won this debate. In closing, we'd like to salute our military, law enforcement, firefighters, EMTs, and other emergency personnel for their service to our communities and our nation. I'm Mark Hyman. Good night.